The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek, but Ruth Miller barely noticed. She sat on the wooden steps of what had been her home just hours ago, her arms wrapped protectively around the bundle at her breast. The baby girl, not yet 3 days old, slept peacefully, unaware of the harsh judgment that had descended upon them both. "You got till noon to clear out," growled Jonas Hartley, her late husband's brother, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Should have given Benjamin a son. A girl ain't worth the milk to feed her." Ruth's body still ached from the difficult birth. Her dress, once white, bore the stains of her ordeal, and her face was pale as parchment. But it was the coldness in the eyes of those who had once called her neighbor that cut deepest. Mrs. Aldridge, the banker's wife, lifted her skirts as she passed, as if poverty and misfortune might be contagious. "Benjamin must be turning in his grave," she muttered loud enough for Ruth to hear. "All that work building up the claim, and for what? A useless girl child." The words stung like wasps, but Ruth held her tongue. She'd learned in the 2 days since her daughter's birth that defending herself only made things worse. The men who ran Copper Creek had decided her fate the moment the midwife announced, "It's a girl." Benjamin had been dead 6 months now, crushed in a mine collapse that took 3 other men with it. Ruth had managed to keep the small house and his share in the copper mine, surviving on the charity of neighbors and the promise that she carried Benjamin's child, a son. They all assumed, a son who would grow strong and work the mines, who would carry on the Miller name and stake. But she had failed them. Failed Benjamin. Failed the town. A daughter was a burden in Copper Creek. Another mouth to feed in a place where survival meant back-breaking labor and calloused hands. The mine owners wanted workers, not little girls who would grow up needing dowries and protection. "Please," Ruth finally spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "Just give me a few more days. I can barely walk, and the baby—" "The baby should have been born dead if it was gonna be a girl," interrupted Silas Thorne. Emerging from the shadows of the mining office, the most powerful man in Copper Creek. He owned the largest share of the copper mine and half the businesses on Main Street. His presence made everyone else step back. Thorne was a man who had clawed his way up from nothing, and he wore his cruelty like other men wore gold watch chains, his pale eyes, cold as winter creek water, fixed on Ruth with calculating disdain. "Your husband owed me money," he said, though Ruth knew this was a lie. Benjamin had been careful with his accounts. "With him gone and you birthing nothing but useless girl flesh, I'm calling in the debt, the house, his mining shares, all of it. You're lucky I'm giving you till noon instead of throwing you out right now." Ruth struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "Benjamin's shares are rightfully mine. His will—" "What will?" Thorne smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. "I ain't seen no will. Have you boys seen a will?" The men around him shook their heads, some looking away in shame, others meeting Ruth's gaze with hard indifference. These were men who had drunk whiskey with Benjamin, who had attended their wedding, who had promised to look after her if anything happened. But promises meant little when balanced against Silas Thorne's power. "You can't do this," Ruth whispered, clutching her daughter tighter. "Where will we go?" "That ain't my concern," Thorne said. "Maybe you can find work in one of the saloons down in Deadwood. They always need women, though you'll have to leave the brat somewhere." The suggestion was clear, and several women in the gathering crowd gasped. But no one spoke up. No one dared. Ruth looked around at the faces she had known for 3 years. She had sewn quilts with their wives, shared recipes, nursed their children through fever. But a woman who couldn't produce sons was worse than barren in their eyes. She was cursed. "My grace is not a burden," Ruth said, finding strength in anger. "She's a child of God, same as any boy." "Blasphemy," spat Jonas. "God made women to serve men and bear sons. You failed at the only thing that matters." The crowd murmured agreement. Ruth saw Martha Henley, whose daughter she had helped deliver just last spring, turn away, Even the pastor's wife, usually so quick with scripture about charity, kept her distance. "You got till noon," Thorne repeated. "After that, I'll have the boys escort you out personally, and they ain't always gentle with stubborn women." He turned and walked back to his office, his boots clicking on the boardwalk like a countdown to their doom. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming about ore prices and the coming winter, as if a woman and baby hadn't just been condemned to likely death in the wilderness. Ruth sank back onto the steps, her strength finally failing. Grace began to fuss, hungry again, with shaking hands. Ruth adjusted her shawl for privacy and let the baby nurse. At least she could still provide this, though her milk was thin from poor eating. "Ruth?" A soft voice made her look up. Mary Chen, the Chinese laundry woman, stood at a respectful distance, holding a small bundle. I brought some food and clean cloths for the baby." Ruth's eyes filled with tears at this small kindness. Mary was barely tolerated in Copper Creek herself, allowed to stay only because she worked cheaper than anyone else would. "Thank you," Ruth whispered. Mary set the bundle on the step beside her. "There's an old wagon path goes east," she said quietly. "Leads to Fort Laramie eventually. Maybe 3 days walking, if—" She glanced at Ruth's pale face and didn't finish. 3 days walking. Ruth could barely manage 3 steps without dizzy spells. And with a newborn. In October, with winter coming on fast. "I'll manage," Ruth said, because what else could she say? Mary nodded and hurried away before anyone could see her showing sympathy to the outcast. Ruth understood. Kindness was a luxury few could afford in Copper Creek. The sun climbed higher, and the shadow of the gallows tree grew shorter. That tree had seen men hang for stealing horses, for killing over card games, for being too dark-skinned in the wrong place. Ruth wondered if being a woman who birthed daughters would someday be added to the list of hanging offenses. She forced herself to stand again, to go inside and gather what little she could carry. Benjamin's rifle was gone. Jonas had taken it the day after the funeral for safekeeping. The money tin was empty. She suspected Thorne's men had helped themselves while she labored in childbirth. All she had left were a few clothes, a Bible, the quilt her mother had made for her wedding, and Benjamin's watch. She wrapped these in a blanket, fashioned a sling for Grace from a torn petticoat, and prepared to face the wilderness with nothing but determination and a 3-day-old baby. As she emerged from the house for the last time, she saw them gathering again, the men of Copper Creek, waiting to ensure she left, to watch her walk into almost certain death. They would tell themselves later that they had no choice, that a mining town was no place for a woman alone, that they were doing her a kindness by forcing her to seek her fortune elsewhere. Ruth straightened her spine and walked down Main Street with as much dignity as her battered body could muster. Grace whimpered against her chest, and Ruth hummed a lullaby, the same one her own mother had sung in better times, before the cholera took her, before Ruth had married Benjamin and come west to this place that had promised so much and given only grief. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and the endless brown of the prairie, Ruth turned for one last look. Copper Creek sprawled in the valley like a wound in the earth, all rough lumber and mine tailings, smoke rising from chimneys and the smelter alike. Somewhere in that maze of greed and broken dreams lay Benjamin's grave, marked with a wooden cross that would rot within a year. She couldn't even say goodbye. "Come on, Grace," she whispered to her daughter. "We're not wanted here." And with that, Ruth Miller walked into the wilderness, her baby at her breast and her death sentence signed by those who measured a woman's worth only in the sons she could produce. Behind her, the men of Copper Creek watched until she was just a speck on the horizon, then returned to their important business of pulling wealth from the earth, satisfied that they had protected their town from the curse of a woman who dared birth a daughter. Not one of them noticed the lone rider on the ridge, watching it all through eyes that had seen too much cruelty to be surprised, but not so much that he had forgotten how to feel anger at injustice. The rider waited until the woman was out of sight of the town, then began to follow at a distance, leading a spare horse and carrying a debt that death had not erased. The sun had reached its zenith when Ruth's legs finally gave out. She collapsed beside a dried creek bed, her body shaking with exhaustion and fever. Grace wailed hungrily, and Ruth fumbled with trembling fingers to nurse her, though she feared her milk was already failing. That's when she heard the horse. The sound of hooves on hard earth made her heart race. Had Thorne's men followed to ensure she didn't double back? Or worse, were they outlaws who would see a lone woman as easy prey? The rider came into view slowly, and Ruth's breath caught. He was Lakota, tall and lean in the saddle, with long black hair adorned with a single eagle feather. Scars marked his bronze skin, one across his left cheekbone, another disappearing beneath his buckskin shirt. He led a second horse, a paint mare laden with supplies. Ruth clutched Grace tighter, trying to stand but failing. She'd heard stories of what Indians did to white women, stories whispered around quilting circles and over washtubs. But she had no strength to run, no weapon to defend herself. All she could do was meet his dark eyes and wait for her fate. The warrior dismounted with fluid grace, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. When he spoke, his voice was deep and carried an accent, but his English was clear. "You are Benjamin Miller's woman." It wasn't a question. Ruth nodded, confusion mixing with fear. "My name is Tokala Swift Fox in your tongue. Your husband saved my life at Willow Springs. I carry a debt." Ruth's mind reeled. Benjamin had never mentioned saving an Indian's life. But then, there was much about her husband's life before their marriage that remained a mystery. "Benjamin is dead," she managed to say. "I know. I was there." Tokala gestured toward the distant mountains. "Watching when the mine fell. Watching when they put him in the ground. Watching today when they cast you out for birthing a daughter." His words carried no judgment, just simple statement of fact. Ruth felt tears threaten again. "Then you know I have nothing, no way to repay whatever debt—" "The debt is mine," Tokala interrupted. "A life for a life. Benjamin Miller saved mine, so I save what was his." His gaze moved to the baby. "You and the child. You come with me." Ruth stared at him. I can't. You don't understand. They'll hunt us. Thorne won't let it stand. A white woman going with a savage?" Tokala's mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "Let them come. I did not survive 10 winters of war to fear mine rats." He moved closer, and Ruth instinctively pressed back against the creek bank. But he merely knelt, studying her with the practiced eye of someone who had seen much sickness and injury. "You burn with birth fever. The child needs food and warmth. You both die here by tomorrow if you do not come." The brutal truth of his words cut through Ruth's fear. She looked down at Grace, so tiny and perfect, depending entirely on her failing strength. What choice did she have? Death in the wilderness, or take her chances with this scarred warrior who claimed a debt to her dead husband? "Can you stand?" Tokala asked. Ruth tried and failed again. Without hesitation, he moved to help her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he steadied her. He smelled of leather and sage smoke, earth and horse. Not unpleasant, just different from the coal dust and whiskey smell of Copper Creek men. "The child," he said, and Ruth reluctantly let him take Grace while he helped her onto the paint mare. The baby looked impossibly small in his weather-hardened hands, but he held her with careful confidence. "You have held babies before," Ruth observed, surprising herself by speaking. "Many. My sister has 5 children." He handed Grace back once Ruth was settled, then secured her few belongings to the saddle. "Can you ride?" "Yes." It was one of the few things she'd insisted on learning when they come west, much to Benjamin's amusement. Tokala mounted his own horse, a powerful bay stallion with a warrior's bearing. "We go now. They will send men soon," as if his words had summoned them. Dust appeared on the horizon. Riders from Copper Creek, coming to ensure the exile had truly left their territory, or perhaps to finish what Thorn had started. Tokola made a sound of disgust. "Cowards! Many against one woman." He turned his horse. "Can you gallop?" "I'll have to," Ruth said, gathering her strength. They rode hard, Ruth clinging to Grace and the saddle horn, fighting waves of dizziness. The paint mare followed Tokola's stallion with sure feet, as if she'd done this dance many times before. Behind them, shouts arose as the Copper Creek men realized their quarry had found an unexpected protector. Gunshots cracked across the prairie. Ruth hunched over Grace, praying frantically. Tokola guided them into a ravine, using the terrain to break line of sight. More shots, but fading now. They slowed after what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Ruth swayed dangerously, and Tokola brought his horse alongside to steady her. "Not much farther," he said. "There is shelter." "Why?" Ruth gasped out. "Why help us?" Tokola was quiet for a long moment. "Your husband. He was scouting for the army. Found me after a battle. More dead than alive. Could have collected bounty for a Lakota scalp. Instead, he hid me, tended my wounds, gave me his horse to escape." He glanced at her. "He spoke of you, said you had a good heart, that you saw people, not just their skin." Ruth's eyes burned. That sounded like Benjamin. Always finding the good in others. Always choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. "He would be angry," Tokola continued. "To see how they treat you, he said the whites feared strong women as much as they feared my people. Maybe more." They reached a grove of cottonwoods as the sun began its descent. A small cabin sat hidden among the trees, so well camouflaged Ruth almost missed it. Tokola helped her down, catching her when her legs buckled. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. Buffalo robes covered a sleeping platform, and supplies lined wooden shelves. Tokola laid her down gently, then took Grace. "Rest. I make medicine for the fever." Ruth wanted to protest, to keep her baby close, but exhaustion won. She watched through heavy eyes as the fearsome Lakota warrior built up the fire, heated water and mixed herbs with practiced efficiency. He cleaned Grace with warm cloths, swaddled her in soft furs, and fashioned a sugar teat from cloth and honey when she fussed for milk. "You know much of babies," Ruth murmured. "A warrior learns many things to survive." He brought her a cup of bitter tea. "Drink, all of it." She obeyed, grimacing at the taste. "The men from town will not find this place, and if they do," he touched the rifle propped by the door, then the knife at his belt. "I have defended it before." Ruth finished the tea and felt warmth spread through her body. "I don't even know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. It is justice." He settled Grace in Ruth's arms, then sat cross-legged by the fire. "Your husband was a good man. He died trying to save others in that mine. This the owners do not want known." "What do you mean?" "The supports were rotten," Benjamin warned them, "but fixing costs money. When the cave came, he went back for the others." Tokola's eyes met hers. "He spoke your name at the end and asked," he paused, "asked that someone watch over his family." Ruth felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Of course Benjamin had gone back. Of course he'd thought of others before himself. And of course Thorn had covered it up, painted it as an accident rather than negligence. "Sleep now," Tokola said. "Tomorrow brings what it brings. Tonight, you and the child are safe." Ruth wanted to ask more about this debt, about what would happen tomorrow, about how a Lakota warrior came to have a hidden cabin stocked with supplies. But the herbs were working, pulling her toward healing sleep. The last thing she saw was Tokola silhouetted against the fire, sharpening his knife with methodical strokes while keeping watch. For the first time since Benjamin's death, Ruth felt protected. It should have frightened her. trusting her life and her daughters to this scarred warrior from a world so different from her own. Instead, as Grace suckled peacefully and the fever began to break, Ruth felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope. Outside, night settled over the prairie, and somewhere in the darkness, the men of Copper Creek made camp, unwilling to pursue a Lakota warrior into unknown territory after sunset. They'd returned to town with stories of the crazy woman who'd thrown her lot in with savages, confirmation that casting her out had been the right decision. But in the hidden cabin, beside the warm fire, a warrior kept vigil over a woman and child not of his tribe but under his protection nonetheless, honoring a debt that transcended the boundaries drawn by those who would divide the world by skin and birth and the tyranny of their narrow expectations. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of horses, many horses. Tokala was already moving, rifle in hand, peering through a crack in the cabin wall. 15 men, he said quietly. Your friend Thorn leads them. Ruth's heart sank. She struggled to sit up, still weak but clearer-headed than yesterday. Grace stirred in her arms, making small, hungry sounds. They cannot track here, but they search in patterns. Military trained. Tokala's mouth tightened. We leave now. He moved with swift efficiency, packing supplies into saddlebags, wrapping dried meat and hardtack in oilcloth. Ruth forced herself to stand, swaying only slightly, and began helping as best she could. Where will we go? She asked. North first, to Confuse, then west to the Sacred Hills. My people camp there for winter. He paused, studying her. Unless you wish to go elsewhere, Fort Laramie maybe. Start new. Ruth considered. A fort meant civilization of sorts, but also questions, judgment, and likely no better treatment than Copper Creek had shown. Your people, they would accept us. You are under my protection. That is enough. He handed her a bundle of clothing. Dress warm. We ride hard today. The clothes were native-made, soft doeskin and warm furs. Ruth hesitated only a moment before changing. Practicality outweighed propriety when survival was at stake. They slipped from the cabin as morning mist still clung to the cottonwoods. Tokala had already saddled the horses, moving with the silence of one who had spent a lifetime evading enemies. He helped Ruth mount, then handed up Grace, now wrapped snugly in rabbit fur. If fighting comes, you ride north. Don't look back, he instructed. The paint knows the way to my people. I won't leave you. You will. His tone brooked no argument. The child comes first. Benjamin would say the same. They walked the horses through the stream to hide their tracks, then climbed out onto rocky ground that would show little sign of their passing. Behind them, voices carried on the still air. Thorn's men were getting closer. For an hour, they maintained a careful pace, Tokala constantly scanning their back trail. Then a shout went up. They'd been spotted. Now we run, Tokala said, and kicked his stallion into a gallop. The chase was like something from Ruth's nightmares. The prairie flew beneath the horses' hooves, sage and grass blurring together. Grace wailed at the jarring motion, and Ruth could only hold her tight and pray. Behind them, gunshots cracked, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Tokala led them through terrain that seemed impassable, down steep ravines, across racing streams, through stands of thorny brush that tore at their clothes but provided cover. His knowledge of the land was absolute, every twist and turn chosen to frustrate their pursuers. But Thorn's men were persistent, and they had fresh horses. By midday, the gap was closing. Ruth could see their faces now: Jonas Hartley, Samuel Briggs, men she'd once thought decent, now twisted with bloodlust. There, Tokala pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. We make stand. He practically pulled Ruth from the saddle, pushing her and Grace into a crevice between two boulders. Stay down, no matter what. Ruth wanted to protest, but Tokala was already moving, positioning himself with clear fields of fire. His rifle spoke once, twice. A horse screamed and went down, sending its rider tumbling. The pursuers scattered, seeking cover. For a moment, an eerie quiet descended, broken only by Grace's whimpers and the wind sighing through the rocks. "Give up the woman! Savage!" Thorne's voice boomed across the distance. "She's white folks' business, not yours." Tokala didn't waste breath on reply. His answer came from his rifle, sending Thorne diving behind a boulder. "You're protecting a harlot and her bastard," Jonas Hartley called out. "She probably lay with you already. The whore!" Ruth's face burned with anger and shame. How quickly they painted her with their own twisted brushes, unable to imagine friendship or honor between different peoples. The standoff stretched. Then Ruth heard movement from a different direction. They were trying to flank Tokala's position. She pressed deeper into the crevice, muffling Grace's cries against her chest. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Tokala moved like smoke, firing, displacing, firing again. But he was one against many, and Ruth could see him taking risks to keep them from advancing on her position. A bullet sparked off the rock inches from his head. Another tore through his sleeve, bringing blood. Ruth bit her lip to keep from crying out. Then she heard it, a sound that made the hair on her neck stand up. War cries, echoing off the rocks. Not one voice, but many. Over the ridge came riders, Lakota warriors painted for battle, and at their head, a woman on a spotted horse, her face fierce as any warrior's. The pursuers, caught in the open, suddenly found themselves outnumbered. "White men on Lakota land," the woman called out in accented English. "You go now, or feed the ravens." Thorne emerged slightly from cover. "We're pursuing a criminal." An arrow sprouted from the ground at his feet, fired by a young warrior whose bow was already knocked with another. "You go now," the woman repeated. The men from Copper Creek looked at each other, calculating odds. 15 against 2 was one thing. 15 against 20 or more Lakota warriors was suicide. "This isn't over," Thorne shouted at the rocks where Ruth hid. "You can't hide with savages forever." But they were already retreating, gathering their wounded, casting hateful glances back as they rode away. The Lakota warriors followed them for a distance, ensuring they truly left. Tokala emerged from his position, blood running down his arm. The woman rider approached him, speaking rapidly in Lakota. Ruth caught Benjamin's name and her own. "Come out," Tokala called. "Safe now?" Ruth crawled from the crevice, legs shaking. The Lakota warriors studied her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. The woman rider dismounted, approaching with measured steps. "I am Morning Star," she said. "Tokala's sister." Her eyes moved to Grace. "This is the child cast out for being female." Ruth nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Morning Star made a disgusted sound. "White men are fools. A daughter is blessing. She brings life, continues the people." She looked at Tokala. "You bleed, brother." "It is nothing. It is bullet wound. I will tend it." She turned back to Ruth. "You ride?" "Yes, but—" "Good. We go. This place is too open now." The war party formed up around them, and Ruth found herself in the surreal position of riding protected in the center of a Lakota band. Some of the warriors were barely more than boys. Others bore the scars of many battles. All watched her with wary interest. They rode for hours, stopping only to rest the horses and for Morning Star to properly clean and bind Tokala's wound. She also checked Ruth with gentle efficiency, nodding approval at her recovering strength. "The fever breaks clean. You are strong for white woman," she said. "Your man, he chose well." "He was a good man," Ruth said softly. "Tokala says he died with honor. This is good death." Morning Star produced a water skin and helped Ruth give Grace small sips. "The child thrives. She will be strong like mother." As the sun began to sink, they created a rise, and Ruth gasped. Below stretched a valley dotted with teepees, smoke rising from cooking fires, children and dogs running between the lodges. It was a whole village, hundreds of people living their lives in the shadow of the sacred hills. "My people winter here," Tokola said, "safe from soldiers, from settlers. You stay until you choose where to go." Ruth looked at the peaceful scene, so different from the harsh angles and grasping greed of Copper Creek. "What if I choose to stay?" Tokala and Morningstar exchanged glances. "Then you learn our ways." Morningstar said, "Work hard, contribute to the people. Not easy life, but honest life." They descended into the valley as drums began to beat, announcing their arrival. People emerged from teepees to stare at the white woman and baby riding with their warriors. Ruth straightened her spine, meeting their gazes steadily. She had been judged and found wanting by her own people. Perhaps here, where worth was measured differently, she and Grace might find something like home. As they dismounted in the center of camp, an elderly woman approached, her face mapped with years of wisdom. She spoke to Tokola in Lakota, then studied Ruth with penetrating eyes. "She is Medicine Woman," Tokola translated. "Says the child carries strong spirit, born in sorrow but will know joy." Ruth's eyes filled with tears, the first kind words spoken over her daughter since birth. "Tell her thank you." The old woman reached out and touched Grace's downy head, speaking what sounded like a blessing. Then she gestured to a teepee near the center of camp. "You stay there tonight," Morningstar said. "Tomorrow, we see what comes." As Ruth followed them to the teepee, carrying Grace through a village of people her world had taught her to fear, she realized the greatest irony of all. Cast out for the crime of birthing a daughter, she had found refuge among those whom civilization called savage. And in their acceptance, their recognition of a child's worth regardless of gender, they had proven themselves more civilized than all the proper Christians of Copper Creek combined. The fever returned that night with vengeance. Ruth woke in darkness, her body burning, sheets soaked with sweat. Grace cried weakly beside her, and Ruth realized with mounting panic that her milk had dried up completely. The baby's cries grew more desperate, and Ruth's attempts to soothe her only made things worse. The teepee flap opened, bringing cold air and Tokala's silhouette against the stars. He took in the situation with one glance and disappeared, returning moments later with the elderly medicine woman and Morningstar. "The birth fever comes back," the medicine woman said through Morningstar's translation. "Sometimes it does this. Very dangerous." Ruth tried to sit up, but the world spun violently. "Grace, she needs—" "We know," Morningstar said gently. "Yellowbird has baby son. She will feed your daughter." Through her delirium, Ruth watched as a young Lakota woman entered and took Grace with practiced ease. The baby latched hungrily, and Ruth felt both relief and a deep ache of failure. The medicine woman began mixing herbs, crushing roots, heating stones. She spoke continuously in Lakota, and though Ruth couldn't understand the words, the rhythmic sound was soothing. Strong hands lifted her head, helped her drink bitter tea. Heated stones wrapped in wet leather were placed on her abdomen where the pain centered. "You must fight," Morningstar said. "Your daughter needs her mother." But Ruth felt herself slipping away, pulled into dark waters where Benjamin's voice called to her. It would be so easy to let go, to join him, to leave behind the struggle and judgment and impossible choices. Then she heard something unexpected, Tokala's voice, rough with emotion, speaking in halting English. "You cannot die. I gave my word to a dying man, his woman, his child. I would see them safe. You make me break promise if you die. You make me fail, brother who saved my life." Ruth forced her eyes open. Tokala knelt beside her, his scarred face intense in the firelight. "Benjamin, he was your brother. All who show true honor are brothers. He could have taken bounty, taken glory. Instead, he saw man, not enemy." Tokala's jaw tightened. You will not die. I do not allow it. The fierce certainty in his voice anchored her to the world. Ruth focused on breathing, on fighting, on the sound of Grace feeding peacefully nearby. The medicine woman worked through the night, changing poultices, forcing tea between Ruth's lips, chanting in the old language. By dawn, the fever broke for real this time, leaving Ruth weak as a newborn foal but clear-headed. She found Grace sleeping contentedly in a cradle board decorated with beadwork, her little belly full. "Yellow Bird feeds her through the night," Morning Star explained, entering with a bowl of broth. "She lost her own daughter to winter sickness. Says your baby helps her heart heal." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Such kindness from strangers, when her own people had turned away. For 3 days she recovered, tended by the medicine woman and Morning Star. Tokola came and went, sometimes sitting silently by the fire, sometimes telling her stories of Benjamin, how they'd met, the risks her husband had taken, the jokes they'd shared despite the language barrier. "He spoke of you always," Tokola said one evening. "Said you read books, knew letters and numbers. Said you were too good for mining town." "He was wrong," Ruth said softly. "I wasn't good enough. Couldn't even give him a son." Tokala's eyes flashed. White man sickness. Thinking sons matter more than daughters. My people know better. Women are sacred. They bring life, hold families together, keep the old ways. Without daughters, no future. On the 4th day, Ruth was strong enough to walk around the camp. Yellowbird showed her how to strap Grace to her back in the cradle board, freeing her hands for work. The women watched her carefully but not unkindly, curious about this white woman who had chosen their protection over her own people's. That evening, a commotion arose at the camp's edge. Scouts had brought news. Soldiers were coming, searching for white captives. Ruth's heart raced. Would they take her by force? Would her presence bring disaster on these people who had shown her only kindness? The camp's leaders gathered in council. Ruth couldn't follow the rapid Lakota, but she saw gestures in her direction, heard her name and Benjamin's. Tokola spoke at length, his words carrying weight. Finally, the chief, a man named Red Cloud's cousin, addressed her through Morning Star. "You are not captive. You are guest under warriors' protection. If soldiers come, you choose. Go with them or stay. We will not hold you, but neither will we force you to leave." "And if I choose to stay?" "Then you are one of us for winter. Come spring, we see." The soldiers arrived the next morning, a patrol of 20 men led by a young lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. Ruth watched from inside a teepee as they parleyed with the chiefs, her heart hammering. "We've had reports of a white woman and infant taken captive," the lieutenant said. "We're here to secure their release." "No captives here," Red Cloud's cousin replied calmly. "All in camp are here by choice. I'll need to verify that myself." After much discussion, Ruth was brought forward, dressed in the doeskin dress Morning Star had given her, Grace in her cradle board. The lieutenant's eyes widened. "Ma'am, are you Ruth Miller, from Copper Creek?" "I am." "Your brother-in-law sent word you'd been abducted. We're here to rescue you." Ruth almost laughed at the irony. Jonas, who had thrown her out, now playing concerned family. "I wasn't abducted, Lieutenant. I was dying in the wilderness with my baby when Tokola found me. He saved our lives." The young officer looked uncomfortable. "Still, ma'am, you can't mean to stay here. It isn't proper. Think of your daughter." "I am thinking of her." Ruth's voice grew stronger. "In Copper Creek, she was worthless because she was born female. Here, she is valued. Here, we have food, shelter, protection." "But that is, surely you'd be better among your own kind." "My own kind cast me out to die." The lieutenant shifted his weight. "Mr. Thorne has offered to, that is, he's willing to take you back. Says there was a misunderstanding." Now Ruth did laugh, bitter and short. The only misunderstanding was mine, thinking Christian charity meant something in Copper Creek. She saw Tokala's hand move to his knife, saw other warriors tense. The soldiers noticed too, hands drifting toward weapons. "Please, Lieutenant," Ruth said quickly, "tell anyone who asks that I am here by choice, that I am well treated, that my daughter and I are safe." The officer clearly wanted to argue more, but the reality of 20 soldiers surrounded by over 100 warriors made him reconsider. "If you change your mind, ma'am, Fort Laramie, I know where to find you. Thank you." As the soldiers rode away, Ruth felt something shift inside her. She had chosen, not just survival, but a different path entirely. That night, the medicine woman came to her teepee with paints and brushes. "You paint face for ceremony," Morning Star translated, "to show you walk with us now." As the old woman's gentle hands applied the sacred designs, Ruth thought of all the church services she'd attended, all the sermons about heathens and salvation. Yet here, among these heathens, she'd found more Christianity, real Christianity, the kind that fed the hungry and sheltered the stranger than in all the pews of Copper Creek. Tokala appeared at the teepee entrance as the painting was finished. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded approval. "Tomorrow, I teach you to shoot," he said. "A woman alone must protect herself and her child." "I'm not alone," Ruth said softly. "No," he agreed, his rare smile transforming his scarred face. "Not anymore." That night, as drums beat and the people danced around the fire, Ruth sat with Grace at her breast. Yellowbird had shown her herbs to help her milk return and watched this new world she'd entered. Different faces, different ways, but the same human needs for community, purpose, belonging. She thought of Benjamin, wondered what he would think of his wife and daughter living with the Lakota, but remembering his friendship with Tokala, his ability to see past surface differences, she thought he would understand, maybe even approve. Grace stirred, making small, contented sounds, and Ruth kissed her downy head. Cast out for being born female, her daughter would grow up where women were sacred, where her worth wasn't measured by impossible standards. It wasn't the life Ruth had planned, but as Tokala sat down beside her, offering a bowl of stew, and Morning Star began teaching her words in Lakota, Ruth realized it might be the life she was meant to have all along. Winter settled over the Black Hills like a heavy blanket, but life in the Lakota camp continued its ancient rhythms. Ruth had learned to bank the fire in her teepee to last through the night, to read weather and the flight of birds, to stretch their food stores with careful planning. Grace thrived, growing round-cheeked and bright-eyed, beloved by the women who took turns carrying her while Ruth worked. Then the rumors began. Traders brought word from the settlements. Silas Thorne was offering a fortune for information about Ruth Miller, $500 for her location, $1,000 for her capture. He claimed she had stolen mining documents, that she possessed information that rightfully belonged to Copper Creek Mining Company. "He grows desperate," Tokala said when he heard, "Why?" Ruth shook her head, genuinely puzzled. "I took nothing but clothes and Benjamin's Bible." But that night, unable to sleep, she opened the Bible for the first time since Benjamin's death. As she turned the pages, seeking comfort in familiar verses, a folded paper fell out, then another and another. By firelight, she read Benjamin's careful script, and her blood ran cold. Deeds, mining claims, but more than that, detailed records of Thorne's theft from miners, of claim jumping, of men who had accidents after striking good veins, names, dates, amounts, evidence that would see Thorne hanged if it reached federal authorities. The last paper was a will, properly witnessed, leaving everything to Ruth and their child. And at the bottom, a note in Benjamin's hand: "If something happens to me, take these to Fort Laramie. Trust no one in Copper Creek. Find Captain James Morrison. He is honest." Ruth's hands trembled. Benjamin had known, had been gathering evidence. His death was no accident. She showed Tokola the papers at first light. His face darkened as Morningstar translated the key points. Your husband was warrior in his way. Tokola said, fighting with paper instead of weapons. This is why they killed him. I have to get these to Fort Laramie, Ruth said. To this Captain Morrison. Very dangerous. Thorne has men watching all routes, and winter travel. Tokola shook his head. Better to wait for spring. But spring might be too late. Every day Thorne searched for her was another day he could destroy evidence, silence witnesses, solidify his power. That evening, word came that made waiting impossible. A war party reported seeing riders approaching from the east, not soldiers, but hired guns, dozens of them, led by a half-breed tracker known for finding anyone, anywhere. They come for you, the chief said through Morningstar. This brings danger to all our people. Ruth felt the weight of their eyes. She had brought trouble to those who had sheltered her. I'll leave, she said. Tonight, I won't let your people suffer for my presence. You go, you die, Tokola said flatly. Woman alone in winter, with baby, hunted by many men, no. Then what? We fight, said a new voice. Yellowbird stepped forward. The woman who had nursed Grace. This woman is our sister now. Her enemies are our enemies. Others voiced agreement, but Ruth could see the doubt in some faces. Why should they risk war for a white woman? The chief raised his hand for silence. We counsel tonight, decide together. Ruth spent the day in agony, watching the normal life of the camp while knowing it might all end because of her. Grace played with Yellowbird's son, the two babies babbling at each other in the universal language of infants. How could she bring violence to this peaceful place? As darkness fell, Tokola came to her teepee. Pack light, only what you must have. The council decided to cast me out. The council argues still, I decide. His eyes were hard as flint. I gave my word to dying man. I keep it. We leave in 1 hour. Tokola, no. Your people... My people survive because we know when to fight and when to run. Now we run. Later, maybe we fight. He left before she could argue more. Ruth packed with shaking hands, the papers hidden again in the Bible, warm clothes for Grace, a little food. She had just finished when Morningstar entered. Foolish brother, she said, but with affection. He thinks he does this alone. She handed Ruth a pack. Supplies for journey, and this. A revolver, small but serviceable. You know how to use? Tokola has been teaching me. Good. You may need it. Morningstar embraced her briefly. You are sister. We do not forget. They slipped out of camp like shadows. Ruth, Tokola, and to her surprise, 3 other warriors. One was Yellowbird's husband, Eagle Feather. You helped my wife's heart heal, he said simply. I help you now. They rode through the night, taking paths that seemed impossible in darkness. Behind them, no pursuit yet. The hired guns would wait for dawn to attack the camp, expecting to find her there. By morning they were high in the hills, the horses laboring through snow. Grace, bundled against Ruth's chest, was surprisingly quiet, as if she understood the need for silence. Then Tokola raised his hand. Riders below, moving fast. They discovered her flight and picked up the trail with disturbing speed. The tracker is good, one warrior said. Maybe too good. They pushed harder, but the horses were tiring. By afternoon, the pursuit was close enough to see individual faces. Ruth recognized several men from Copper Creek, including Jonas. But it was the lead rider who made her blood chill, a man with dead eyes and filed teeth, wearing a necklace of what looked like human scalps. Josiah Creed, Eagle Feather spat. He hunts anything for money, men, women, children, no honor. A shot rang out, then another. They were in range. Tokola led them into a narrow canyon, walls high and snow-covered. It offered protection but also trapped them if the entrance was blocked. "Here we stand," Tokala said. "Eagle Feather, take the woman. Ride through to other end. We hold them here." "No," Ruth said. "I won't let you die for—" "Not die, delay." He actually smiled. "I am very hard to kill. Ask anyone." More shots echoed off the canyon walls. No more time for argument. Eagle Feather grabbed her horse's reins and spurred forward, deeper into the canyon. Behind them, gunfire erupted as Tokala and the two warriors engaged the pursuers. The canyon twisted and turned, narrow enough that snow from the walls above dusted them as they passed. Then, disaster. A rockfall blocked the path. Not completely, but enough that horses couldn't pass. Eagle Feather dismounted instantly. "We climb." Ruth looked up at the steep, snow-covered slope. With Grace? No choice. He was right. Ruth strapped Grace tight against her chest and began to climb. The rocks were icy, treacherous. Behind them, the gunfire intensified, echoing like thunder. How long could 3 men hold against 30? Halfway up, Ruth's foot slipped. She slid several feet before Eagle Feather caught her, nearly going over himself. "Cannot stop," he urged. "Must reach top." They climbed, muscles screaming, lungs burning in the thin air. Grace began to cry, the sound seeming impossibly loud. Almost there. Almost. Well. The voice came from above. Josiah Creed stood at the canyon rim, rifle aimed casually at them. "Thorne's paying good money for you, woman, though he didn't say nothing about needing you alive." Ruth felt Eagle Feather tense beside her, ready to draw his weapon despite the impossible angle. "The baby, though," Creed continued. "That's extra. Always buyers for healthy white babies. Course, might be half-breed by now, but—" The shot came from behind Creed. He staggered, surprise replacing arrogance on his face, then toppled forward, falling past them to crash on the rocks below. Tokala appeared at the rim, rifle smoking, blood running from a gash on his forehead. "I told you," he said, "very hard to kill." He and another warrior, the third hadn't made it, pulled them up to safety. Below, the remaining pursuers milled in confusion, their leader dead. The canyon a death trap if they entered. "They will go back," Tokala said. "Regroup, but we gain time." "Your friend?" Ruth asked. "Died as warrior. His name will be sung." They recovered the horses Creed's group had left and rode hard west. By nightfall, they could see Fort Laramie's lights in the distance. "We leave you here." Eagle Feather said, "Soldiers not welcome us as they will you." Ruth wanted to protest, but knew he was right. She dismounted, clutching Grace. "I can never repay—" "No debt," Tokala interrupted. "Benjamin's debt paid. But you—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "You become family. This does not end." He reached into his pack, pulling out a small leather pouch. "For Grace, when she is older, tell her she has family in the Lakota Nation. Always." Then they were gone, melting back into the darkness, leaving Ruth to walk the final mile to the fort alone. But not truly alone. She carried with her the papers that would bring justice, the daughter who would grow up knowing her worth, and the knowledge that family came in many forms. Behind her, somewhere in the vast darkness of the plains, Thorne's hired killers nursed their wounds and counted their dead. They would report back that the woman was harder to catch than expected, that she had dangerous friends. Thorne would rage and plan and spend more money. But Ruth Miller was no longer the frightened, fever-weak woman cast out of Copper Creek. She had survived winter storms and gunfights, had learned to shoot and ride and trust in the kindness of supposed enemies. And she had evidence that would bring down an empire built on blood and greed. The guards at Fort Laramie nearly shot Ruth when she emerged from the darkness, a wild-looking woman in native dress carrying a baby. Only her desperate cry of, "I need Captain Morrison. I have evidence of murder," stayed their hands. Within an hour, she sat in the captain's office, Grace sleeping in her arms, while Morrison, a stern man with kind eyes, read through Benjamin's papers by lamplight. His expression grew darker with each page. "Mrs. Miller," he said finally. "These documents suggest a criminal conspiracy of the highest order. Your husband was investigating Silas Thorne?" "He was, and they killed him for it." Ruth's voice was steady now, hardened by all she'd endured. "Made it look like an accident, but he knew those mine supports were rotten. Thorne refused to fix them." Morrison called for his aide. "Send a telegram to the federal marshal in Cheyenne. We need a full investigation team." He turned back to Ruth. "You'll need to testify. It could be dangerous." "Captain, I've been shot at, chased through blizzards, and nearly died of fever. I'm past fearing Silas Thorne." The captain smiled grimly. "Good, because what your husband uncovered, it's bigger than just Copper Creek. These shipping manifests suggest Thorne's been selling copper to foreign buyers, avoiding federal taxes. That makes it Washington's business." He arranged quarters for Ruth in the fort, simple but clean, with a proper bed and hot meals. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. But safety, she discovered, came with its own challenges. The wives of the officers didn't know what to make of her. Her skin was wind-burned dark, her hands calloused from work, her manner direct in ways that made them uncomfortable. They whispered about her time with the Lakota, speculation running wild about what she'd done to survive. "Poor dear," she overheard Mrs. Colonel Patterson say, "living like a savage. No wonder she seems so changed. And that baby, who knows what blood runs in its veins now?" Ruth wanted to scream at their ignorance, to tell them about Yellowbird's kindness, Morningstar's wisdom, Tokala's honor, but she held her tongue. The investigation needed her credible, respectable. So she accepted their cast-off dresses, submitted to their attempts to civilize her appearance, and kept her memories of the Lakota camp locked in her heart. 2 weeks later, Federal Marshal Samuel Brennan arrived with a team of investigators, a former cavalry officer with a reputation for incorruptibility. He listened to Ruth's full story without interruption. "The Lakota warrior who protected you, Tokala. I remember him from the treaty negotiations. Impressive man." Brennan studied her shrewdly. "You trust him?" "With my life, with my daughter's life." "Good, because I may need his testimony too. These murders your husband documented. Some victims were found on tribal land. The Lakota might have witnessed things." Ruth's heart leaped. An excuse to see Tokala again, to thank him properly, but she kept her expression neutral. He might agree, if approached with respect. The investigation moved swiftly. Brennan's men descended on Copper Creek like avenging angels, seizing records, interviewing miners, exhuming bodies. The federal attention Thorne had worked so hard to avoid now focused on him with burning intensity. But Thorne wasn't finished. One night, Ruth woke to find a figure looming over Grace's cradle. She reacted on instinct, grabbing the revolver Morningstar had given her. The shot was loud in the small room. The intruder, one of Thorne's men, crashed through the window he'd entered by, clutching his shoulder. Guards came running, but the damage was done. Thorne knew exactly where she was. "We're moving you," Brennan decided. "There's a safe house, but..." He hesitated. "It's on the reservation. The Lakota have agreed to protect you until the trial, if you're willing." Ruth almost laughed. Willing? To return to where she'd found more family than among her own kind. 3 days later, she rode back into the winter camp, this time accompanied by Marshal Brennan and a small federal escort. The reunion was bittersweet grief for the warrior who died helping her escape, joy at seeing familiar faces. Tokala greeted her formally in front of the federal men, but she caught the warmth in his eyes. "You are welcome here," he said in English. "You and Small One." The investigators set up their operation from the camp, an unprecedented cooperation between federal law and the Lakota Nation. Warriors who had witnessed Thorne's men dumping bodies came forward. Others testified about threats, burned homesteads, poisoned water sources, all aimed at driving natives from land that showed copper deposits. Ruth spent her days helping Brennan build the case, her evenings learning more Lakota words from Morning Star. Grace played with the other children, already picking up the musical cadence of the language. At night, Ruth often found Tokala sitting outside her teepee, keeping watch though no one had asked him to. "You don't have to guard us," she said one evening, bringing him hot tea. "I choose to," he replied simply. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Ruth spoke. "When this is over, when Thorne is brought to justice, I don't know where Grace and I will go. You have place here, if you want." Tokala kept his eyes on the stars. "Morning Star speaks for you in Women's Council. Says you have strong spirit, work hard. Grace already has friends among the children." "And you?" Ruth asked softly. "What do you say?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I say Benjamin chose well. His woman has courage of warrior, heart of mother, wisdom to see past skin to spirit. I say—" He paused, finally looking at her. "I say you belong where you choose to belong, here or elsewhere, but I hope here." Before Ruth could respond, a commotion arose at the camp's edge. Riders approaching fast, Brennan's men with news. "They found it," Brennan announced, triumph in his voice. "A hidden room in Thorne's house, full of records, every bribe, every murder, every stolen claim, and more. Correspondence with foreign agents, plans to establish private militia, even discussions about eliminating federal oversight entirely." "It's over then?" Ruth asked. "Almost. We arrest Thorne tomorrow. But there's something else." Brennan pulled out a document. "Your husband's will has been validated. His mining shares, the house, a bank account in Cheyenne. It's all yours. Quite valuable. Actually, that section of mine he discovered, it's rich, very rich." Ruth stared at the paper. Wealth, security, everything Copper Creek had denied her because she'd birthed a daughter. She could go anywhere, be anyone. "Of course," Brennan continued. "The mine needs managing. You could sell to honest buyers, or—" He glanced around the camp. "The Lakota have mineral rights to this land by treaty, rights that have been ignored. A partnership between you and the tribal council could be very profitable for everyone." Ruth looked at Tokala, at Morning Star who had joined them, at the camp that had become home. An idea began to form. "What if," she said slowly, "we created something new, a mining operation that honored both the land and the people, that provided jobs for anyone willing to work, regardless of race, that built schools where Lakota and white children could learn together?" Idealistic. Brennan said, "But with federal backing to ensure fairness, it could work." Morning Star translated rapidly for the elders who had gathered. Excited discussion erupted in Lakota. The chief raised his hand for silence, then spoke carefully in English. "This woman speaks of new path, not white way or Lakota way alone, but both together. Difficult path. Many will oppose, but," he smiled, "worth trying, for the children." That night, the camp celebrated, not victory, that would come with Thorne's arrest, but possibility. Ruth danced with Grace in her arms, surrounded by people who had taken her in when her own cast her out. Tokala watched from across the fire, and when their eyes met, his smile promised things that made her heart race. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Thorne's arrest, a trial, the complex work of building something new from the ashes of greed. There would be those on both sides who called her traitor, who couldn't understand bridges built between worlds. But tonight, under stars that looked the same whether viewed from Copper Creek or a Lakota camp, Ruth Miller, mother, survivor, an unexpected architect of change, was exactly where she belonged. The Cheyenne courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Miners, merchants, Lakota delegates, Federal officers and reporters from as far as Chicago packed the courtroom as the territory of Wyoming versus Silas Thorne began. Ruth sat in the front row, Grace sleeping in her arms, wearing the one good dress the officers' wives had given her. Tokala sat directly behind her, his presence a silent comfort. Thorne entered in shackles, but with his arrogance intact. His expensive lawyers flanked him, men who'd twisted law into fortune for years. He caught Ruth's eye and smiled coldly, mouthing words she couldn't catch but whose meaning was clear. This wasn't over. District Attorney Marcus Fitzgerald opened with devastating precision. Gentlemen of the jury, we will show that Silas Thorne built an empire on murder, theft, and corruption. That he killed good men who stood in his way, stole claims from honest miners, and betrayed his country by selling strategic resources to foreign powers. The defense countered with character assassination. This case rests on the testimony of a fallen woman. Thorne's lawyer proclaimed, who consorted with savages, who abandoned Christian society, who seeks revenge for her husband's unfortunate but accidental death. Ruth forced herself to remain calm as witness after witness was called. Miners testified about friends who disappeared after striking copper. Family spoke of claims stolen through forged documents. The evidence Benjamin had gathered was presented in damning detail. Then came Ruth's turn. She walked to the witness stand with measured steps, aware of every eye upon her. State your name for the record. Ruth Miller, widow of Benjamin Miller. The prosecutor, Fitzgerald, led her through the story carefully. Benjamin's discovery of the unsafe mine conditions, his investigation, the night he died. He came home late, Ruth said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Said he'd found proof that Thorne was skimming federal copper shipments, selling to foreign buyers. He was going to take it to Fort Laramie the next morning, but that night... She paused, swallowing hard. The mine collapse happened that night. They said it was an accident. But you don't believe that? My husband inspected those supports the day before. He said they'd been deliberately weakened. He was murdered. Mr. Fitzgerald, for trying to do right. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his smile sharp as a blade. Mrs. Miller, is it true you abandoned your husband's grave to live among the Lakota? I was cast out of Copper Creek for giving birth to a daughter. I would have died if... Please answer yes or no. Did you live among the Indians? Yes. Did you participate in their heathen ceremonies? I participated in their kindness when my own people showed none. And this Indian, he gestured at Tokala with clear disdain. Did you engage in improper relations with him? The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Tokala started to rise, hand moving toward where his knife would normally rest. But Morningstar beside him gripped his arm. I object, Fitzgerald shouted. Relevance goes to the witness's character and motives, Your Honor. Ruth lifted her chin. Tokala saved my life and my daughter's life, asking nothing in return. He protected us when Christian men would have seen us dead. If that's improper, then yes, I am guilty of accepting improper kindness. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even some jury members smiled. The defense tried another approach. These documents you claim your husband gathered, convenient that they appeared only after his death. How do we know you didn't forge them? Because I can barely write my own name properly. Ruth replied, My husband did the accounts. Anyone who knows me knows that. So you admit you're uneducated? I admit I'm not book-learned like you, sir, but I learned plenty this past winter. I learned that honor exists in unexpected places, that a Lakota warrior's word means more than a white man's contract, that my daughter's worth isn't measured by what's between her legs, but what's in her heart. She looked directly at Thorne. And I learned that men like Silas Thorne fear strong women almost as much as they fear the truth. The questioning continued for hours, but Ruth held firm. When finally dismissed, she walked past Thorne's table with her head high. He leaned forward. You think you've won. Whore, I have friends, resources, you'll never be safe. The judge, who'd been listening, spoke coldly. Mr. Thorne, you just threatened a witness in my courtroom. Bailiff, make note of that. The next day brought Tokola to the stand. The sight of a Lakota warrior testifying in a federal court was unprecedented. He spoke carefully, his English formal but clear. Benjamin Miller saved my life. Good man, honest man. He feared Thorne would kill him. Asked me to watch his family if something happened. He looked directly at the jury. I keep my promises. The defense tried to discredit him, painting him as a savage who'd corrupted a vulnerable white woman. Tokola weathered their attacks with stoic dignity, answering only what was asked, refusing to be baited. On the third day, Marshal Brennan presented the evidence from Thorne's hidden room, ledgers detailing bribes, letters discussing removing obstacles, a list of names with dates that matched mysterious deaths and disappearances. But it was the final witness who sealed Thorne's fate. Jonas Hartley, Ruth's brother-in-law, took the stand as a prosecution witness. "Why are you testifying against Mr. Thorne?" Fitzgerald asked. Jonas looked broken, aged 10 years in the month since Ruth's exile. "Because I helped him. God forgive me. I helped murder my own brother." The courtroom exploded. Ruth gripped Grace so tightly the baby woke and cried. Tokola's hand touched her shoulder briefly, grounding her. "I didn't know they meant to kill him." Jonas continued, tears streaming. "Thorne said they just wanted to scare Ben, make him stop investigating. I told them when he'd be in that section of mine, but they weakened the supports. They killed him and 2 other men just to cover it up. Why come forward now?" Jonas looked at Ruth. "Because I saw what we did to her, throwing out a woman who just birthed a baby. My brother's widow, his daughter. We became monsters, and I can't live with it no more." Thorne lunged across the defense table. "You bastard! We had a deal!" It took 3 bailiffs to restrain him. His lawyers tried to call for mistrial, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the real Silas Thorne. Violent, uncontrolled, guilty. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Murder, conspiracy, tax evasion, corruption. The judge, a stern man who'd seen too much frontier justice, pronounced sentence. "Silas Thorne, you represent the worst of what greed can do to a man. You killed for money, destroyed families for power, corrupted the very foundations of law and order. I sentence you to hang by the neck until dead." Thorne screamed threats as they dragged him away, but Ruth didn't hear them. She was looking at Benjamin's Bible in her lap, thinking of the man who'd died trying to bring justice. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. Miners cheered. The Lakota delegates stood proud, having seen federal law work for once in their favor. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Miller, what will you do now?" Ruth stood on the courthouse steps, Grace in her arms, Tokola and Morningstar flanking her. "I'm going home," she said simply, "to build something new, something my husband would be proud of." "Which home?" a reporter pressed. "Copper Creek or the Lakota camp?" Ruth smiled, thinking of the plans taking shape. A mining operation that honored both progress and tradition. Schools where children of all colors could learn together. A place where her daughter could grow up knowing her worth. "Both," she said. "I've learned home isn't about where you're from. It's about where you're welcomed, where you're valued, where you can build a future." As they walked through the crowd, Jonas approached hesitantly. "Ruth, I know I got no right to ask, but could I know my niece?" Ruth studied him, the man who'd cast her out, who'd helped murder Benjamin, but also the man who'd finally found courage to speak truth. "Justice isn't revenge," she said quietly. "You can visit Grace, but you'll see her in her home, among her people, all her people." Jonas nodded, tears falling again. "Benjamin would be proud of you. You're stronger than all of us." As they prepared to leave Cheyenne, Brennan pulled Ruth aside. Thorne's assets will be seized, as his victims. You and the other families he destroyed have claim to compensation. It's substantial. Use it for the partnership, Ruth said without hesitation. For the schools, the fair wages, the future we're building. Brennan smiled. Your husband chose well. Mrs. Miller. No, Ruth corrected, looking at Tokala helping Morningstar with the horses. At Grace sleeping peacefully despite all the chaos. We chose each other, and we keep choosing every day. The journey back to the Black Hills felt different this time. Not a flight from injustice, but a return to possibility. Behind them, Silas Thorne awaited the gallows, his empire of greed crumbling. Ahead lay the hard work of building something better. Ruth rode with confidence now, no longer the terrified woman who'd stumbled into the prairie months ago. She'd faced down the most powerful man in Copper Creek, testified in federal court, and won justice for Benjamin and so many others. But more than that, she'd found herself, found her strength, found her family in the most unexpected places. As they created a rise and saw the Lakota camp spread below, drums beating in welcome, children running to greet them, Ruth felt tears on her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of joy. She was home. Spring painted the Black Hills in shades of green and gold. 5 years had passed since Ruth first stumbled into the Lakota camp, half dead with her newborn daughter. Now she stood on the same ridge, but everything had changed. Below stretched not just the traditional camp, but a thriving community. The mine operated on the hillside, not the scarring gash Thorne would have made, but a careful operation that took what was needed without destroying the land. A schoolhouse sat near the creek, its doors open to both Lakota and white children. Small houses dotted the valley, some in traditional style, others of lumber, but all part of the same community. Mama, look! Grace ran up, her dark hair flying, holding a wooden horse Tokala had carved. At 5, she switched effortlessly between English and Lakota, equally at home in both worlds. Uncle Tokala says I can learn to ride a real horse soon. When you're a bit older, little one, Ruth said, smoothing her daughter's hair. The child ran off again, joining a group of children playing by the water. Lakota, white and mixed heritage together. She grows strong, Morningstar said, joining Ruth on the ridge. The years had deepened their friendship into true sisterhood. Like her mother, Ruth smiled. Some days I hardly recognize myself from that frightened woman you took in. Same woman, just found her strength. Morningstar paused. Tokala returns today from the federal meeting. Ruth's heart quickened, though she kept her expression neutral. Tokala had been gone 3 weeks, negotiating with federal officials about expanding their revolutionary partnership to other tribal lands. His absence left an ache she was finally ready to acknowledge. The sound of horses drew their attention. A small party approached. Tokala, Marshal Brennan, and surprisingly, 2 small figures Ruth recognized with a mix of joy and old pain. Peter? Sarah? She ran down the slope as Benjamin's children from his first marriage dismounted. They were older now. Peter nearly 12, Sarah 10, but she knew them instantly. Aunt Ruth. Sarah flew into her arms. Uncle Jonas said we could finally come see you. Peter hung back, more cautious. His mother had died birthing Sarah, and Benjamin's death had sent them to live with distant relatives in St. Louis. Ruth had written countless letters, sent money, but this was their first visit. You live with Indians? Peter asked, his tone uncertain. I live with family, Ruth corrected gently. Some happen to be Lakota. Some are white. What matters is how we treat each other. Tokala dismounted, his face carefully neutral as always in public. But Ruth caught the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. The Federal Commission approved, he announced. 3 more partnerships like ours, starting next year. The model works. Brennan, now a close friend and advocate, added, There's resistance, of course. But the profits speak louder than prejudice. Fair wages, shared ownership, sustainable practices. It's the future, whether the old guard likes it or not. That evening, the community celebrated with a feast. Ruth watched Peter and Sarah slowly relax as Lakota children taught them games, as they tasted fry bread and listened to stories told in 2 languages. Grace appointed herself their guide, proudly showing off her world. As night fell and the celebration continued, Ruth found herself walking with Tokola along the creek. They'd done this countless times over the years, but tonight felt different, charged. "The children settle in well," he observed. "Yes, I hope." Ruth paused. "I hope they'll stay. Benjamin would want his children together." "And their mother? What does she want?" Ruth stopped walking. 5 years of careful friendship, of partnership in building something unprecedented, of feelings held in check out of respect and propriety. "Their mother," she said quietly, "wants to stop pretending that respect and friendship are all she feels." Tokola turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, the scars on his face were silver lines, marks of survival and strength. "When you first came," he said, "you were Benjamin's wife. To feel more would dishonor his memory, your grief. But now I'm Ruth Miller, just Ruth, and She took a breath. "I love you, not because you saved me, but because of who you are, who we've become together." His hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "I have loved you since you stood in that courthouse and spoke truth to power. Loved Grace as my own daughter, but I would not speak while you still mourned." "I'll always carry Benjamin with me," Ruth said. "He brought me here, in a way, but my heart is ready for new love. For you." Their kiss was soft, a promise more than passion. When they pulled apart, Tokola smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed him. "In my culture, a man must prove himself worthy of a woman's family. I should speak to Morning Star, as your sister." Ruth laughed. "She's been telling me to stop being foolish and marry you for the past 2 years. "Wise woman, my sister." They walked back hand in hand, finding the celebration still going strong. Morning Star took one look at them and whooped with joy, calling out in Lakota. The women surrounded Ruth, teasing and congratulating, while the men clapped Tokola on the back. "Does this mean Uncle Tokola will be our real uncle now?" Sarah asked innocently. "If you'll have me," Tokola said seriously. "A man who marries takes on all her children, all her responsibilities." Peter, who'd been wary all day, stepped forward. "Our father wrote about you in his letters, said you were the most honorable man he knew, white or Indian. Your father saved my life. I have tried to live worthy of that gift." "Then, yes," Peter said with the gravity of a child trying to be grown. "You can marry Aunt Ruth." The wedding took place a month later, a blend of traditions that perfectly captured what they'd built. Ruth wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by Morning Star with beautiful beadwork. Tokola dressed in his finest ceremonial clothes. Marshal Brennan officiated the legal ceremony, while the Lakota spiritual leader blessed their union in the old way. Grace stood with them, holding her wooden horse, beaming as Tokola formally adopted her in both traditions. Peter and Sarah flanked them, tentatively but genuinely happy. As the sun set over their valley, Ruth stood with her new husband, watching their blended family and community celebrate together. Cowboys and warriors, miners and hunters, children of all backgrounds playing while their parents shared food and stories. "My mother used to tell me," Ruth said, "that God works in mysterious ways. I never understood until now." "What do you understand?" Tokola asked, his arm around her waist. "That sometimes we have to lose everything to find where we truly belong. That family isn't about blood or skin color, but about choice and love. That a woman cast out for birthing a daughter might help birth a new world instead." Grace ran up, clutching wildflowers. "For you, Mama, and Papa." She'd started calling Tokola that naturally, and his eyes still softened every time. As night fell and the music started, fiddles mixing with drums, creating something entirely new, Ruth danced with her husband while their children played nearby. The wooden horse Grace carried everywhere had been joined by a wooden doll. A family Tokola was carving one figure at a time. Tomorrow would bring challenges. There were still those who called their community an abomination, who threatened and schemed. The work of building something new was never easy. But tonight, under stars that blessed all equally, Ruth Miller, Standing Fox, as she'd chosen to be known, was simply a woman surrounded by love. The frightened, cast-out mother who'd stumbled into the prairie was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, bridging worlds with courage and grace. The fire crackled warmly as families began settling for the night. Tokola carved by its light while Ruth sang softly to Grace, Peter and Sarah drowsing nearby. It was a simple scene, domestic and peaceful, but it was also revolutionary. A mixed family in a mixed community, proving that the future didn't have to repeat the past's mistakes. And in that quiet moment, with her daughter in her arms and her husband at her side, Ruth knew that everything, the pain, the exile, the fear, the fighting, had been worth it. She'd been cast out for birthing a daughter. Instead, she'd helped birth hope itself. The West was changing, one family at a time, and theirs would light the way.